Hi, welcome Brightlights to Healers with Humor, a podcast brought to you by Candice, the visionary behind Indiglow Soul, and Shelly, the owner of Finding Your Light. Join us as we explore the intricacies of our healing experiences and share the wisdom we've accumulated along the way. In each episode, we're going to invite you into our intimate conversations where we candidly explore the highs and the lows of our healing experiences. Through our podcast, we want to extend our hands to those navigating their own path of healing, offering a sanctuary of understanding and companionship. Whether you're navigating through the shadows of self-doubt or reveling in the glow of self-discovery, Healers with Humor is there to honor the strength that it takes to heal and celebrate the joys of self-love and growth. Join us on this journey, embracing the beauty of healing and the power of community.
Welcome back, Brightlights, to Healers with Humor, Season 1, Episode 13, Becoming Your Own Safe Space. I'm Candice.
And I'm Shelly. I'm ready to start talking about this today.
Yes.
All right. So I have a famous saying. If people spent time focusing on themselves, they would have no time to worry about what anyone else is doing.
True, true, true.
Now, that said, I'm an extremely nosy person, so most of the time I'm having to say it back to myself. Shelly, you focus on yourself. You have no time to worry about what everybody else is doing.
That's right.
But I do think it's true, right? As we think about understanding our own behaviors and choices and thoughts, and our bodies, it does leave very little time on what other people are doing, right? How they're driving us crazy, how they're navigating their lives, and really focusing ourselves on navigating our own healing journeys.
Yes.
I can be my toughest critic.
Oh, yeah.
Critic, right? Or my largest fan. But I can't get away from myself. Damn.
No matter how hard you try.
Right? We the voice that we hear most often is our own. And so I do think it's important that I really focus on becoming a safe, loving, forgiving refuge, a safe place for myself. So as we focus on self healing and journeys today, I know that you've likely got us a candle because of this particular topic and a card that really resonates with today's episode.
I do, for sure. And I agree. Becoming our own safe space is integral to this whole process. And as we talk further in this episode today, when we talk about the journey of our inner child and what is ego and how do we do a shadow work, the things that we do, that we talked about this in another episode, our thoughts and intentions, right, all have vibrations. And so it holds true for this as well. Our own, right, you said our own toughest critic. And so paying attention to that in our own sacred and safe space. But the candle for today is acceptance. And the mantra that goes with that is, I love and accept myself for who I am.
Oh.
And that in itself speaks volumes, because first you have to know who you are, right? All the different versions of you, because there's been so many, and love and accept myself for who I am. And we've talked about this before, but loving ourselves is part of the journey. We've been separated from ourselves in some way, shape, or form, and coming back to that safe space of being ourselves is a big part of it.
And whose candle is that?
That is, yes, it is who we always use, Soul Love. So Lindsay from Soul Love, and I'll put soulloveconnections.com. I will put her information in the notes. But her candles are amazing, and she always infuses, loving Reiki and puts crystals in the candles. They're just gorgeous. And the when I was pulling a card for this episode, I thought, what are the oracle cards going to tell me about this? I was a little skeptical. And then I pulled a card from the deck from Asha Frost, and it's called the Sacred Medicine Oracle. And then I was even more skeptical. I thought, what are you going to tell me in here? And the card that I chose, or that popped out today, is a 53 card, which reduces to 8. And then the name of it is called 7 Generations Legacy. And again, it's like, okay, what are you going to tell me in this? But I do find it fitting. So from the book, the first paragraph or so says, every thought, kind word, and intentional action has impact. 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. Think about that for a second. It says, you are to be commended for your dedication to creating a healed way. Spirit witnesses you walking gently upon this earth, respecting your kin and all of creation. This card is calling you to be a good ancestor, inviting you to reflect on the legacy you are leaving behind. And there's a lot more to it, but I think that's the essence of the message today. So what are we in this healing journey? We know we're healing ourselves, and through the work that we both do with Emotion Code, right? We know that we can heal energy for previous generations and forward generations. And so as we create and become our own safe space through this healing process, really just remembering that we're doing it, there's a legacy to it. And so we're not only helping ourselves, but we're helping those that weren't able to do it for themselves for whatever reason. And then making it an easier path for the future generations.
Yeah, I love that. Well, that's perfect for what we're going to work through today, which is the journeys of self-love, inner child work, ego, and shadow work. And what I'd like us to talk about with each of the journeys is the method that we found most helpful on that particular journey, some of the learnings that we had, and then let's share some advice to our listeners. And as always, we'd love to hear how you have worked through these healing journeys as well.
Yes.
So let's start with self-love. We've definitely talked about self-love in the past. So let's kind of get a little deeper with it and talk about the methods, learning, and advice that worked best for each of us.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So for me, self-love therapy is the method that I thought was most helpful to get to know me, to get to start the conversations that I needed to have with myself, to really help me dig deeper into having a better relationship with self and building self-love. I think the part that I needed to learn was I had to give it to myself first. So whether that was love or being safe or a refuge, because that's been a big, I'll say, pillar of my healing journey. One of the things that kicked it off was the idea that I wanted to be a refuge for myself and others, as opposed to being at such a place of discourse.
Yeah.
And trust. If I didn't trust myself, how could I trust anyone else? Right. So building that relationship with myself, holding boundaries, holding my word to myself. Those things were huge because I needed to do it first with myself.
Yes.
What about you?
Same boundaries. That's the first thing that came up for me as the most impactful thing that I learned along the way to help with self-love. So really sitting down and thinking about what was I willing to put up with and how would I love myself enough to put myself first and not feel guilty. Yeah. Makes me cry even just thinking about it.
It's hard. I think people have no idea. I've spent a lot of time just this past week with boundaries, and boundaries for people who either haven't set boundaries or are people pleasers or
Mhm.
empaths. If you had any idea how hard it is for us to set boundaries,
Yes.
that actually just say, I need to take care of myself.
Yeah.
It's painful,
Yes. Yes.
absolutely painful for me to do it.
Yes. And depending on the level of, for me, depending on the level of relationship I have with that person, makes it even more difficult, right? If it's
Mhm.
a newer person in my life, it's still difficult, maybe not as difficult, but if it's someone who I've been in relationship with for decades, um, and I have to now create some boundary, it's agonizing.
Mm.
It is not taken lightly by any stretch. What I had to start with was small boundaries, and you talked about that, right? Learning to love yourself, learning that boundaries are not requests, that they're not about me trying to get what I want and being manipulative, right? They're about literally setting limits for myself, to define what I find acceptable and healthy in my relationships and interactions. What do I find me, not anybody else,
Mhm.
me? And man, that took a lot of work because I hadn't considered myself as a person, as a being in this world, in the relationship. I didn't know that what I thought mattered. I didn't know that what I thought counted. I thought that I just had to base everything off of the other person or other people in that relationship.
Mhm.
And we'll talk a little bit more about codependency in another aspect of this healing, because that plays into this as well. But what do I find acceptable and healthy? Physically healthy, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy. That took a lot of work. That took a lot of digging deep. But once I got there, and it took a while. This was not an overnight process. I mean, I probably worked on this for a year or two, trying to quote unquote fix myself, to be able to be in relationship with someone, um, or people. And what I learned was I didn't have to fix myself to be in relationship. It was not healthy for me mentally. My mental health was at stake. And so I got to make the decision that that was unhealthy for me. And I was not going to accept having unhealthy relationships in my life.
One of the things that I heard just in the last 2 weeks while I've been working on friendships and boundaries and particularly new friendships. And the way that I heard it are like, my boundaries are not to get rid of you or to push you away.
That's
It's
right.
to help keep you in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times it's viewed as like, why are you pushing me away? Why are you trying to cause discourse when the reality of it is, I want to enjoy this relationship more,
Yeah.
and I want to be really comfortable with how it feels
Hmm.
and take care of myself too.
Yes.
Um,
Because we deserve all of
yeah. Well, I definitely think that you're a self-love expert, so I'm commending you for sure on that, because you actually were working to help me with boundaries. So
Yeah.
because frankly, with boundaries, when someone pushes them,
Hmm.
particularly if they're not somebody I know really well,
Yeah.
I tuck tail and run.
Yeah.
I will avoid you like the plague. I am I'm out of there because
Yeah.
it's a fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
I'm a flyer.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yep.
Because I would rather do that than explain to you how this situation is making me feel.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yes.
So big advice. Obviously, you're a proponent of boundaries.
For sure.
Some of the questions that I have to ask myself on self-love journey is, do I have a good relationship with self?
Hmm.
And the other piece in identifying that is, how did others disappoint disappoint me. So when I said like I couldn't trust others,
Mm,
I really needed to go back to could I trust myself?
okay.
So that's some of the ways that I dug back into self-love
Yep.
and where I needed to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. The self-love. Yeah. For me, the key aspect to the boundaries was what am I willing to put up with?
Mm. So good
Um,
advice. Good question to ask yourself.
yep. So the journey of inner child.
Mm.
What
I can
what
already see both of our faces so that everybody else can't see our faces, but we just went, oh.
Yeah. It's always an interesting journey, right? And I don't think that any of these, they're journeys, right? They're not complete. We don't have all the answers. We're sharing, what we've experienced, how we've helped ourselves, how we've helped each other. But there's so many ways, right, to do this work, so many different ways to look at it. But we both have been on and done inner child work, probably a little bit differently than each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it all works. So tell us a little bit about your inner child journey.
So for me, aside from some of the times that I've noticed that I'll just say I act out. I'd have
No.
to really dig back into, I'm sorry, where did that attitude come from?
Mhm.
The thing that I found the most helpful has really been hypnosis.
Okay.
When I sat down with this topic and I thought, inner child, I really thought I was going to go to my meltdowns, my tantrums,
Mhm.
the times that my inner child has just really lashed out.
Mhm.
But obviously that's more of how it shows up, not
Yeah.
how I've worked to resolve it.
Mhm.
And so hypnosis has really been a helpful tool for me. And the reason for that is because trust, as I've talked about it in the self-love piece, has been such a big part of my healing journey. Why don't I trust people? Why can't I trust myself?
Yep.
Learning to trust myself. And in order to get to the root, from the beginning of
Mhm.
why I had trust issues with everyone, men,
Mhm.
myself, hypnosis was the most helpful to, I'll just say, connecting some of the dots
Mm.
that I couldn't really connect for myself. What about you?
So I'll say that for me, the energy work that I've done for myself, that I do, has helped me understand, because again, I don't remember a lot, um, has helped me understand ages where things have happened, that those ages, those inner child ages, um, I had the opportunity to go back. So a big piece too is going back to those ages and taking my power back. And so that's a concept that again was new to me in this whole energy healing process. But, consciously or unconsciously, we go through situations in life where people take our power. We allow them to have it. We don't know we're doing it, right?
Mhm.
Um, but taking my power back from those who took it and didn't and shouldn't have. So that's been a huge piece of my inner child healing, and going back into those ages of, little Candice, finding out what she needed, letting her know that I was there to help her now, in a way that obviously I couldn't before. I I didn't want H2 Candice running the show
Mm.
anymore. So I remember talking to you. I don't even remember what the situation was, but I knew I had to go back into, I think it was H2. And little Candice was sitting at like this control panel.
That's my favorite Candace, but that's my favorite little Candace, by the way.
At the control panel in a big white chair. And I walk in the room and she turns around and she's like, "What are you doing here? What do you want?" And I was like, "I'm here to help." She's like, "What do you think you're gonna help with?" She had lots of attitude at age 2. And so slowly but surely, right, I sat down, we had a conversation. Ultimately, I had to give her some cotton candy
Mm.
to let her so I could take control for a little bit. And so we've, over time have a relationship. And little age 2 Candice isn't running the show as much. But to your point, it's about those, where am I responding or am I reacting? And if I'm reacting to something, there's a reason, there's a trigger. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in, shadow work as well. But yeah, definitely taking my power back, understanding the ages that I needed to go back and heal and talk to.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, to your point, right? A 2-year-old running the show. But there are situations, I refer to them as sort of my, lashing out tantrums.
Mhm.
Certain situations would cause a reaction, and it's because you feel unsafe, right?
Yeah.
Unsafe. And in order to try to protect yourself, right?
Yes.
These inner child behaviors come out.
Yeah.
And understanding where they started, and first of all, right, trying to understand that they're there to it's in an effort to try to protect you, right?
That's right.
But then having that conversation that says, what are you trying to protect me from? What
Right.
were we trying to deal with at that age? And then understanding that we're not expecting 2-year-old Candice to manage
Yes.
today's issues, right?
Mhm.
And we're going to be there for ourselves.
Yeah.
Is huge. Huge.
Absolutely.
So what advice do you have for our listeners if they're doing inner child work? What are some either bits of advice or questions they can ask themselves?
Yeah, I would say, take your time. Don't try to rush it. Brokering those relationships with those younger pieces of us takes time. I would say that I wouldn't go it alone. So finding someone that can help you, whether it's through hypnosis, a therapist, anybody who does internal family systems work, that parts work, could be helpful. Doing work with either you or I, just having gone through our own processes, and the energy work, through your Reiki or through, faulty, clearing faulty belief systems, whatever that looks like. Don't go it alone. That's a piece where it is helpful to have other people to help you along the way.
I think, and you can agree or disagree, but I think working on clients and obviously work for myself, inner child is one of the most common things that come up with, even if it doesn't seem like it was, you can't pinpoint areas of your childhood that you would have said are different or needed work.
Yes.
It's probably one of the most common things that come up in people's bodies when working on them in sessions.
Agree completely. Yeah. And a lot of people just aren't aware, right, of it, which is totally fine. But yeah, being able to work through it is very, very helpful. And I still find, ages and situations, again, it's not a one and done type of thing. But being aware of your reactions rather than responses, is typically where I get the nuggets that I need.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, my biggest piece of advice, although I totally agree with the reactions, given that I use the term tantrum and lashing out. Right. It's almost like my body was freaking out.
Yep.
And it was, right. It was a child taking over, trying to be safe and ask for what it needed, safe, but not in an adult way.
Yeah.
So for me, I think the biggest thing is if you would have asked me 5 years ago, Shelly, how was your childhood? And I would have said, I don't know, normal, right? I think a lot of us just say, oh, well, there were things or, but normal.
Yeah.
Because I don't think any of us know what normal is. We're all saying, that our childhoods were normal, but I don't know that a lot of us understand what we're saying normal is, because I don't think anything is normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of us have trauma from situations that we don't necessarily realize that were stored as trauma, but then also realize, right, just how difficult it can be to be a child in an adult world.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's probably, to me, one of the things that probably takes the most work is self-love and inner child. So to me, those first two journeys are lifetime
Yeah.
of healing work.
Yeah. And there's so much compassion that you gain for yourself in that process, in those two journeys.
For sure. For sure. All right. Well, we're going to move on to ego.
Ego. So understanding the function for me, understanding the function of our ego and that it really just wants to keep me safe, right? I appreciate that. But once I knew that I was able to have a conversation with my ego and say, thank you for keeping me safe. I appreciate you. I understand what you're trying to do. And I'm still going to do the scary thing anyway. So please step aside, right? And allow this change to happen. That was huge for me. That was a really big turning point in how I made decisions, what I allowed myself to do on my healing journey, because a lot of it is super scary. And our ego steps in a large way when we have lived 40 something years in a certain way. And all of a sudden you're like, I think I'd like to change all of that. It's jarring for the ego, right? And so for me, the understanding of that it's just trying to keep me safe and that I can have a conversation. And you know what? Sometimes it's right. And I need to take a step back and that's not safe for me. And I need to do a little bit more work in another area of my life before I'm able to do that other piece. But yeah, that's for me what that looked like. How about for you?
Yeah. So, what I was surprised when I sat down with this topic, was shadow work was the part that's helped me work on my ego the most. So most of what I wanted to show people, right, is what would be in the protective in the ego part. And in the shadow piece of really understanding, was the piece that actually helped me. I'll just say people get to know me and me get to know people. So thinking about things like I actually wasn't perfect, right? So much of my life I spent showing perfectionism.
Yep.
And how perfectly orchestrated I had my job and my home and my house and my yard. But that actually was keeping me from getting to know people because I wasn't showing them anything about who I was, being vulnerable, and no one could actually get to know me.
Gotcha.
So while I desperately wanted to get to know people, be close to people, it made it impossible for me to actually be close with people, because the ego was keeping them at such a distance.
Gotcha.
For safety again.
Yeah.
But not actually allowing me to have what I wanted in my life. And so really diving into, not only authentic self, but shadow self. And really just trying out vulnerability.
Just trying it out.
Just trying it out.
We're just gonna slap that on for the day.
But in reality, if you think about it, if I walk in and I say, I've got everything figured out, it doesn't allow you, the other person, to have a space where you can identify with me at all.
Right.
Right. You're gonna then keep walls up too, because you don't want me to know who you are or that you're imperfect. I tell myself on a regular basis, and it's true with others, it needs to be more true with myself. But other people's imperfections and flaws are really what makes them like unique and beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so it's really what makes me unique and beautiful.
Absolutely.
So why wouldn't I want someone to know that person?
Yeah.
So if the ego would just chill for a bit.
Until it take a back seat for a minute.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about like how people would dive into working more on the ego, suggestions?
So those places where you're getting ready to make a decision, you're doing something that's different than you have done before. And that voice that happens in your head just gets really, really, really loud. You can't do this. You can't do this. Why would you do that? Right. It's not safe for us to do this. Why would you want to change? Whatever that voice says, really just quieting yourself, getting to that, place of being able to listen and understand why it wants to keep you safe. That piece was where I've had the biggest impacts. I think about last year, you actually helped me quite a bit with it. There was a women's conference that I was going to, and a lot of my being did not want to go because it knew that it was going to be so much change. But I so desperately wanted to go because I knew it was going to be beautiful. And we worked through a lot of different scenarios, right? There was a lot of different inner child pieces, even the night up until I went. I was up overnight just sitting with my inner child and that ego going, it's okay, it's safe. I've done the work. My body can handle this, right? So whenever you get that like really jarring, oh my God, I can't do this when you're getting ready to do something that's impactful or changing, just really sit with the ego and see what it has to tell you.
Yeah, it's funny. I think what we've both just said indirectly is keeping you from what you want,
Yes.
whether it's healing or close relationships or, something that feels a little bit out of your comfort zone and change. It can all be good for you,
Yes.
but it's different.
Yeah.
And different can be scary.
Absolutely.
Or it can be exciting.
Or it could be
Sometimes it's
exciting.
both.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, I think what we've also both just agreed on, right, is getting curious, getting
Yes.
compassionate, getting curious,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of digging in, which is the same thing to some degree that we said about inner child, right?
Yeah.
When you have a reaction, when you have certain emotions,
Mm-hmm.
getting curious about why,
Why?
which parts of you, why, um, and then having a conversation to say, hey, what just happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's that about?
Agree.
Mm.
Agree. So this journey with the shadow is I had a harder time with this one. So I'm going to let you go first and talk
Yeah.
about your experience.
So, the way that my therapist had talked about shadow was if you were driving a bus and all of your parts and personalities were on the bus, what would that look like?
Mm.
And then what you get down to is who's driving the bus?
Who's driving the bus?
Who's driving the bus?
Who's at the control panel?
And one of the ways that we dove into that work was to have me write a list about everything that drives me crazy about myself and other people.
Okay.
That was a long list. And I don't even think that she was properly prepared for the list that I would that I created.
Mm-hmm.
But that shadow piece is sort of, there's the piece of or the personality of Shelly that everyone sees. And then there's the parts of me that I am either not so happy about or I don't like,
Mm-hmm.
or I'd prefer to hide and let you find out later. um and it could just be because they don't fit the box that the world has put me in.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think about my entire life and what I was known for, it was being organized,
Mm-hmm.
well planned, well executed, never let you down. In reality, I'm gonna let you down at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna be organized in every instance.
Yep.
And so the parts of me that are messy, chaotic, disorganized, unplanned, unready, are the parts for me that I look at as shadows.
Mm.
And even some of the things that came up while working on boundaries and friendships this week,
Yeah.
I had to realize that for me, um, feels like a shadow, because two very different things are true. I love meeting new people.
Yep.
And I can't, just based on how life is, hang out and play all day with everyone. Although I would love to.
Yeah.
That's not how life goes, right? So
Yep.
that part of needing to set boundaries and limit and what my limitations are two things that have to exist together.
Yeah.
At the same time. So for me, the biggest thing has been having conversations with myself. Start typing out or writing out my thoughts, and then really just getting to know me. This is true, and this is also true. So that I can understand, right, my behaviors.
Yeah.
Why I can have two feelings that feel definitely different. I love having new people to meet, but when 5 people ask me to do something at the same time, it feels like, it's too much. And my back actually starts to get tight, right? So understanding the two different parts of myself, and then how to navigate that, right? With boundaries, with conversations.
Yep.
But really try to figure it out, because for me, I think there's a lot, we want things to be black and white. Right? But so many things about us are contradictions.
That's right.
Yeah. So how have you gone about shadow work, or how are you navigating that?
So for me, the shadow work has been about exploring and integrating the parts of myself that I've repressed and ignored. So again, with the repressed childhood trauma, I don't remember a lot of my childhood. And so what I had to really focus on is, as an adult, and how I, take a look at, where am I reactive? And, we've kind of used these situations or these words for each of these journeys. And so they are a little all intertwined, but they all are different at the same time. So I've had to look at, why am I reacting a certain way, and understanding that. So at the root, for me, a lot of my shadow work that I've had is around codependency, right? Which is an unhealthy relationship, where one person is overly dependent on another. Now, innately, I would tell you that I am the most independent person in America, and that codependency does not
Which is
fit.
also true.
But I am a codependent. I grew up in a codependent household. And I had to recognize that, and where in my life did that show up? How did that impact me? What relationships? How did it help me or hurt me at work? And my relationships. And so learning more about how I became codependent allowed me to learn more healthy coping mechanisms, and recognizing a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors. So in relationships, you talk about, slapping that vulnerability on for a try. I probably was, because of a lack of boundaries, way more open than I needed to be in relationships. So I would probably tell anybody who would listen my whole story, right? And then I felt like I had been too vulnerable, and then I questioned myself, and what did they think about me? And right, like that whole hamster wheel would start. But understanding codependency, at its core, of what I didn't receive that I needed. You can talk about attachment styles, right? So how do I attach in relationship? Most of my shadow work has been around that. And how do I, when things don't go well, or if I'm in a triggered situation, how is codependency coming into play with that, right? So if you think about some of the characteristics of people who are codependent, right? There's low self-esteem, a need for approval, having difficulty setting boundaries, and having just an unhealthy attachment to another person. And for me, I would say that this, in newer relationships, the need for approval, it was the core of what those new relationships looked like. and I think we've talked about this at other times too, where I didn't even really consider how I felt or how I wanted to be in relationship. I just needed everybody to like me.
Oh.
And so looking at the shadow of that and why has been a big journey.
There are a couple different times. One was in a ladies' retreat, and we talked about it in our conversations today. But I think there is, I don't know if it's something that we're taught by parents, society, TV, but having others choose us, whether it's in relationships, friendships, and so much of that, at least in our past, has been about the other person.
Yes.
And not about, do I like the friendship do I have, right?
Mhm.
And I always think with relationships, it's something that we're taught. What I learned in the women's retreat as I was thinking about how we pick partners is that I was waiting to be chosen,
Mm.
somebody to ask me to marry them. And really going back to try to remember how much thought had I done in, is this someone I want to marry?
Yeah.
Right. Or same thing. Is this someone that I want to be friends with?
Yeah.
I think so much of our lives we've spent where somebody says, I want to be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, yay.
Oh, okay, great. Let's be friends.
When in reality, right, to your point, understanding, do we both enjoy each other's company? Do we both make each other feel energized as opposed to drained, right? So much of that was not in our language, our how we talk, how we think. And I do think that's a huge part of it. Okay, well, yeah, I think we've been able to kind of give a good overview of the journeys of self-love, inner child, ego, and shadow work, and what helped us, and maybe some advice for our listeners. We would love to hear how you're navigating those different journeys and what methods and advice you'd have as someone is on their healing journey on those topics.
Yes. And remember that this wasn't a day, a week, or a month. We've been on these journeys for a long time. And you have to take each one and, in and of itself and intertwine them all together at some point.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely that ball of twine we've talked about.
For sure. Well,
Yeah.
another amazing conversation. Thank you so much. And Bright Lights, please share your thoughts with us.
All right, thanks.
As we conclude this episode of Healers with Humor, we want to express our deepest gratitude to you, fellow Bright Lights. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt exploration. Our journey began with a chance encounter at an expo, two souls seeking healing and connection. Through shared experiences, laughter, and tears, we forged a bond rooted in trust, love, and the relentless pursuit of growth. We invite you to continue this journey with us by sharing your own healing stories and connecting with us. Your presence in our community enriches our collective healing experience, and we're honored to walk alongside you. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll explore topics that resonate with the soul, offering insights, guidance, and inspiration along the way. Until then, remember, you are not alone on your healing journey. Thank you for tuning in, and may your path be illuminated with love, courage, and endless possibilities.